I just don't understand. You know, the police harassment and, you know, just because he was in the army, he was considered dangerous.
Tonight, the Quebec inquiry hears testimony from a veteran about his 2 years in the justice system. Métis Yvonne Boyer is sworn in as an independent senator.
It's just a good way to present the different cultures of the North in one games.
And the competition continues at the Arctic Winter Games. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The Quebec inquiry continues its work in Montreal. A family from the Cree community of Mistassini was heard this morning. Danielle Rochette reports.
Nigel Bosom wanted to talk about what happened to him in June 2016. He was camping a few kilometers from his home community. It started raining pretty hard, so he decided to go back to Mistassini. He tried to stop someone passing by in a four-wheeler.
I asked him for a ride, but I had my machete in my hand, but I was holding a blanket over my shoulders, holding the machete in my hand like that. And this later the police would describe it as I was holding the machete in a threatening manner.
He was arrested by an AUNU police force officer. After 4 days in jail, they laid some very serious charges against him.
I was arrested by the local police force, AUNU police force. I had 6 charges against me, from intent to harm to weapons charges, very severe charges.
Those charges were dropped in December 2017 after 2 years of legal wrangling.
After almost 2 years in the court system, it was finally determined that the primary witness had been coerced by the local police force to press charges against me. And when that came out, the charges were just all dropped.
Nigel, 37 years old, father of 2 young boys, served in the Canadian Army for 10 years. According to his father, Nigel was victim of his passion being in the Army, serving the country.
I just don't understand. You know, the police harassment and, you know, just because he was in the army, he was considered dangerous, you know. To me, I feel safer with my son having a gun than I would with a policeman in the community. That's how I feel.
Nigel's stepmother hopes the commission will result in better services for Aboriginal people.
In that there won't be so much abuse on the part of the police, as well as some of the other public services like the health services or even some of the band services, you know, that there will be improvement and less harassment for some people.
Nigel and his family left the community and are now living out west, depriving the grandparents and siblings from their presence. Danielle Rochette, APTN National News, Montreal.
And we would like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. A House committee held its first meeting today to talk about how Indigenous languages can be used in House of Commons proceedings. As APTN's Todd Lamoran reports, it's not as easy to do as it sounds. Today's first advocate of their use was Cree-speaking NDP Romeo Saganash.
I want to thank you all for inviting me here, said Saganash in Cree. His remarks were translated into both official languages, English and French, but it requires advance notice and permission to do this, even in committee.
Yes, we will give you permission to speak your language in the House of Commons. That's charity. I don't want charity. I want my rights to be recognized and respected.
The Committee on Procedure and House Affairs is looking into how Indigenous languages can be heard and understood by everyone in Parliament. It's an initiative started by Liberal MP Robert Falcon-Ouellette last June, when he spoke Cree in the House, but there was no one to translate it. The committee also heard from Charles Robert, clerk of the House of Commons. He talked about the Senate's experiment of accommodating Inuktitut back in 2009.
I think the ones that are popularly spoken, it's likely that it would be easier. We had difficulty actually with Inuktitut, not necessarily because there is a dearth of members who speak the language, but they just don't happen to live in Ottawa.
Robert also said finding interpreters for Indigenous languages with fewer speakers would be problematic.
But to the extent that it is marginal, well, you'll have problems identifying interpreters who would be willing to do the work on relatively short notice to come and do a service that might only last, what, 15 minutes tops?
But Saguenay doesn't believe in exclusion.
My constitutional right to speak applies in the very same manner to every other language in this country.
Saguenay does admit getting Indigenous languages other than Cree translated into French could be a problem.
It depends on our geographic locations most of the time. It happens. It happened in the Cree world because we're in Quebec, but I know it's going to be difficult for other parts of the country.
Saguenay says a proposed Indigenous Languages Act would help.
I think it's important that this legislation clearly establishes that Indigenous languages are official languages in this country. If we're serious about preserving, revitalizing Indigenous languages, then that's the path to follow.
Ultimately, he wants to one day stand up in the House and have Cree translated simultaneously into English and French.
This is going to be a victory for all of us, not just me. So in that sense, it's going to be, of course, a historic moment, but I think it's going to be a victory for Canada.
The Committee on Procedure and House Affairs will continue to study this issue on Thursday. That's when NDP MP for Saskatchewan, Georgina Jollybaugh, and Liberal MP for Winnipeg Centre, Robert Falcon-Ouellette, will testify. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Today marked the first day of hearings in Thompson, Manitoba for the National Inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Last fall, family members and advocates pushed for hearings in northern Manitoba to accommodate the unique struggles for isolated families. Today, Commissioner Audette heard familiar testimony about the lack of policing in the north. Brittany Hobson brings us more.
She's left a big hole in our family, and it's really difficult to heal when you don't have closure.
It's been 6 years since Dawn Anderson was found dead in the snow one early winter morning. On November 18, 2011, the 37-year-old mother of 3 was found by an RCMP officer in the town of Leaf Rapids, approximately 980 kilometers north of Winnipeg. Dawn was the youngest of 11 siblings. Her brother Keith lived in town. He was the first to be notified.
I got a voicemail, and it's the RCMP. And they sat there and they said, well, Keith, you know, could you come and see us at the cop shop? With one breath, he sits there and they tell me they found my sister deceased. And then I didn't even get a chance to swallow that. The next minute they sit there and they tell me, your nieces are home alone, you know, where we can get a babysitter.
The family was told Dawn froze to death near a garage where she had been partying with 2 men. Hilda Anderson Pierce, one of Dawn's sisters, says from the beginning the police never took her sister's death seriously.
There was no police tape securing the scene.
The same night they found her, like the same day we found her, her garage burned.
And even though someone set fire to the garage, RCMP wouldn't investigate further.
Everything was taken away from me. It almost seemed like, you know, that RCMP had total control of everything. You know, they identified her and everything else, and yet, you know, I'm a family member that's there. Where was my opportunity?
The family believes racism is still rampant within the RCMP. It's a theme that has come up repeatedly during inquiry hearings.
I just think it's kind of ironic, regardless of your geographical location, that we're experiencing the same things, and that should be sending a strong message to Canadian governments.
Hilda says she will never have closure, but hopes by sharing Dawn's story, it will create a pathway for change.
An investigation is done, and it's done thoroughly, and it completely engages family and those involved. I can guarantee there'd be a different outcome.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Thompson.
Does daylight savings time make any sense to you? Well, the government in Yukon thinks it might be time to scrap it altogether. That story and more coming up after the break. Here's a look at Wednesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. +2 in Fredericton, Charlottetown, and St. John's. -3 in Cartwright, -4 in Nain, a sunny 6 below in La Grande. -5 in Val-d'Or and Chibougamau, -2 in Sept-Îles, +2 in Windsor and London, 3 above in Toronto and Peterborough. Sunny and -3 in Sudbury, 0 in Sioux Lookout and Big Trout Lake. Over in Manitoba, +2 in Island Lake, Norway House and Flin Flon. +1 in Winnipeg, Brandon, Gimli Harbor, and Barons River, where there will be snow once again. In Saskatchewan, +1 in Saskatoon and North Battleford, -12 on Wednesday in Stony Rapids and Uranium City. Welcome back. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently appointed 2 new independent senators from Ontario. Both Martha Deakin and Yvonne Boyer were sworn in today at a ceremony in Ottawa. Yvonne Boyer is a member of the Métis Nation of Ontario organization. She has ancestral roots in Saskatchewan and with the Red River Métis. Senator Boyer is a lawyer, professor, and researcher. Time could soon be a-changin' in the Yukon, as the government there is looking at the possibility of eliminating daylight savings time for a territory that already has ample daylight in the summer months. Shirley McLean brings us more.
In the land of the midnight sun, does it make sense to save a few hours of daylight in the spring and summer? Not according to Wade Ishchenko, Yukon Party's Klawani MLA.
I think it's prevalent across the country a little bit. Those conversations are happening in other provinces. Northwest Territories had put something forward in their legislature. So, there's, and you know what, more and more I'm hearing from people that, I don't think we need it anymore.
Last week, the Yukon Legislative Assembly passed a motion presented by Ishchenko to consult Yukoners about eliminating daylight saving time in the territory. On days like this, maybe it does make sense to change the clock 1 hour ahead and save a few hours of daylight. But for some residents here in Whitehorse, it's a big inconvenience.
Well, it's just an inconvenience for me. I don't think it really adds to the length of the day. I never notice anyway. It's just a chore to change the clock.
I'm a fan. I think that we should eliminate it. It doesn't make a huge difference for me, except for having to change all my clocks, which I don't like to do. I mean, hey, take one more thing off the list. I'm happy about that.
Why don't you think it's needed?
Because it throws your food metabolism off by an hour. Because you got to reschedule everything. And so there's an adjustment time.
Ishchenko says time change really has little to no effect in the Yukon except for confusion.
Oh, people talk about, their kids' schedule in school. That screws it all up. Or health reasons and driving safety. There's lots of studies out there that, of course, on both sides. But I just thought it would be good to have a good conversation with Yukoners.
If Yukon elects to eliminate daylight savings, it will follow in suit with provinces like Saskatchewan and parts of Nunavut that don't spring ahead or fall back in time. Shirley McLean, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
The federal government is investing millions of dollars into Saskatchewan First Nations. Some of that money is going to Indigenous groups investing in more eco-friendly energy. Here's CTV Regina's Gina Martin with some details.
There will soon be more work like this involving First Nations in Saskatchewan.
We were definitely ecstatic and we were happy that we received the monies.
The The federal government's Western Economic Diversification Ministry announced $7.5 million for 14 First Nations-driven projects in the province. First Nations Power Authority of Saskatchewan received $600,000 to enhance renewable energy partnerships amongst First Nations communities and Sask Power.
FNPA is tapped on the shoulder through our master agreement that looks at facilitating First Nations to participate in wind projects and solar projects.
The FNPA has been in Saskatchewan since 2011 and is a membership-driven organization.
The FNPA plays a critical role in reaching out to communities, get their feedback on what works and what doesn't work for Sask Power, and feed that into First Nations Power Authority.
The Pasqua First Nations Pro Metal Industries also received $1 million from the WED, which will be used for several innovative projects. One of those future projects is creating a gasification unit, which will convert waste into synthetic gas, which has a variety of industrial uses.
Many times we have landfills, and those landfills are going to emanate methane gas. So what we want to do is take those the garbage, and burn it off in a clean environmental way.
The leftover ash from gasification can also be safely used for making cement or roofing shingles.
Looking forward for Pro Metal Industries and the ongoing projects and future projects, it will definitely be a big asset to the company.
And it's just one of many green projects being spearheaded by First Nations communities in Saskatchewan. Gina Martin, CTV News, Regina.
Time for a quick break and then plenty of action from the Arctic Winter Games. Here's the rest of Wednesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. -3 in Fort McMurray and High Level, +6 in Calgary and Medicine Hat, +2 in Red Deer. Another soggy day on the wet coast, +7 in Tofino and Campbell River, +10 in Victoria. Snow and +5 in Smithers, -5 and snow in Fort Nelson. In Yukon, -5 with sprinkles in Watson Lake, -15 in Rock River. Over to NWT, -10 in Trout Lake and Fort Simpson, -16 under the sun in Yellowknife. Another chilly day on the way for Sax Harbor and -26. Even cooler in parts of Nunavut, -28 in Baker Lake, 30 below in Cambridge Bay, -29 on Wednesday in Talio and Resolute. Welcome back. The Arctic Winter Games continue in the southern part of the Northwest Territories. Youth are competing in games such as hockey and curling, but they're also combining those games with a northern twist. Our reporter Charlotte Mort-Jacobs was on the ground with athletes today.
Running a snowshoe race and trying to aim a rifle at a target, not exactly an easy task. Most of the biathlon racers in the 2018 South Slave Arctic Winter Games hail from the host community of Hay River. But Jacob Klingenberg is from the small community of Uluwaktuk.
My community hasn't really participated in snowshoe biathlon before Kyron, myself, and Lucian.
Klingenberg is one of 3 Uluwaktuk participants. Each is aiming for ulus and trained by an RCMP sniper on the frozen Beaufort Sea.
Just have fun, do your best, push right through the race.
Snowshoe biathlon became a part of the AWG Games in 1978 because of the traditions of hunting and trapping in northern lifestyle. Today's races are interval starts with teams consisting of 2 athletes. The High Arctic youth loads and fires his rifle, speeding up as he goes. Carried by traditional footwear like mukluks or kamik. The competition is tense, and there are obstacles along the way.
My last lap, I was starting to cramp up with my left calf, so I pushed it. That's how it goes.
The Arctic Winter Games are held every 2 years in different circumpolar regions and bring 9 Arctic contingents together for a full week. Biathlon is just one of many sports. We're here at the finishing line for the Arctic Winter Games Snowshoe Biathlon. Beside me, I have Kyron. How are you feeling about the games today?
Exhilarated. I'm very proud of myself. It's a lot of fun here.
And how long did you take to prepare for this?
I trained for about 6 months and then 2 months right before the race.
And what's next for you? From my understanding, you're going to be competing again.
Yes, I hope to be the next AWG and compete in the same sport.
And final question for you. Do you have any words of advice for anyone that's looking to get into the sport?
Do your best and really develop a passion for your sport.
Thank you so much. Arctic Winter Games, Hay River 2018, Charlotte Moore-Jacobs.
Some impressive stuff. Hockey is also a big part of the Arctic Winter Games, and young athletes from across the circumpolar north are taking to the ice. But as Tamara Pimentel tells us, the rink in the host community of Hay River is much more than just about hockey.
The Northwest Territories has the hometown advantage tonight. They're playing in Hay River's brand new arena, but they're up against rivals Team Yukon. It's just one of many excitements coming from the South Slave 2018 Arctic Winter Games being held in Hay River and Fort Smith. For teammates Ethan Anstey and Jean Lacamero, it's an event unlike anything they've ever seen.
It's pretty cool having all these different teams. It brings diversity to the territories here, and I'm excited here to play with, different nationalities as well.
It's kind of nerve-wracking playing in front of the home crowd, but at the same time, it's just like you feel the energy throughout the room, throughout the rink.
The arena acts as a hub for athletes, spectators, and volunteers. A chance to meet new youth from far away.
You won't see it anywhere else, and it's just a good way to present the different cultures of the North in one games.
Hockey is known as Canada's game, but it's not the only game here.
Only at the Arctic Winter Games would you find a spontaneous gathering for a traditional Dene hand game right outside the hockey arena.
These games, along with other traditional games, are popping up unplanned throughout, and there will be cultural activities happening throughout the week in both communities as well.
Being part of the Arctic Winter Games and having everyone here, it brings the whole Arctic together, and I don't think we get as much appreciation for what's up here, and it just gives the players and everyone a place to show where they belong.
Back on the ice, Anstey and Lacamero show off their skills and a love for a sport they have played all their life.
Pretty important. I know last year a few guys from Yellowknife actually went down south to pursue hockey, so it's in our blood, it's in our systems.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Hay River.
That is an incredible arena, much nicer than the barn I learned to skate in. And that's your APTN National News for this Tuesday. Be sure to join us live tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central when we put Canada's Cannabis Act in focus. We'll be asking whether recreational marijuana will become an economic boom for First Nations or compound problems. That's tomorrow on In Focus, and stick around now. The Laughing Drum with Tim Fontaine is up next. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.